I think it's a good time to get started. This is also streaming on Facebook Live. So I know we have some people who are there who probably haven't logged into Zoom. So we'll just go ahead and get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat box. Or I think you also have the ability to unmute yourself and you can ask any questions along the way as we go. I'm not sure what everyone's familiarity is today with water harvesting, but today we're going to be talking about just general concepts regarding water harvesting. So we're not going to be talking much about any details about how to do the design work or install them. This is really an introduction to water harvesting in general from a permaculture perspective. If you aren't familiar with permaculture, permaculture is a design science that is rooted in observation of the natural flows of ecosystems. And it's a way to design how we live that is in concert with nature, because we are nature. And permaculture is based on these three core concepts of earth care, people care, and fair share. So our goal as permaculture designers is to look at any decision we're making and compare it to these three ideals to see if we're meeting them. If not, then we ought to change the way we're doing things. If we're not caring for the earth with our actions, caring for each other, and distributing the abundance fairly. We forget that the water cycle and the life cycle are one. So our earth is made of mostly water. Most of us learned this in school at some point. It's mostly oceans, 97%, 2% is frozen. 1% of the water on the planet is in rivers, lakes, and groundwater. And that's all of the flowing water that we have access to for everything that we do as humans, all of our drinking water, the water we use to grow food, the water that supports all of the life in our ecosystems is 1% of the water on the planet. It's really a precious resource. And our human body is also 70% water. We're mostly water. And so 50% of that 1% of flowing water we have polluted since the Industrial Revolution began. We have polluted 1/2 of the water on the planet that we have access to. So we have 1/2 of 1% of water available to us at this point. And since we're mostly made of water, that's really concerning. We also learned about the water cycle in school at some point, I'm sure. And we learn about this system where water falls down as rain and either soaks into the groundwater or flows into rivers and streams and runs into the ocean. Then it becomes clouds and the whole thing starts again. And this is the image of the water cycle that most of us are used to seeing. But the truth is, we have built urban landscapes and we have put a lot of concrete, we've compacted a lot of soil because of our agricultural practices, and water is no longer able to get into the ground the way it used to. And we've also created a lot of runoff problems because the water can't soak into the ground. All of that water runs off in flood events. And we know that here in Las Vegas, we don't get very much rain, but when we do get it, we get streets that are flooding. And that water is picking up all of the junk that's sitting around on the ground. And so the runoff that we're creating is a polluted stream of runoff that then runs into our rivers, streams, and oceans. So what we're talking about here is creating a more sustainable water cycle, given the changes that we've made to the planet. And by returning the earth to a sponge-like condition, we can start creating spaces for water to be able to soak in again. So our current relationship with water is, it's maybe not too great right now. We've really created a lot of changes as humans. There are changes to the way we've managed the land compared to, before. We have a loss of relationship with the ecosystem and with land as people now, and a loss of stewardship, a loss of the concept that we all have a responsibility to tend to the land and to the water. We've changed the way we do grazing and fencing on the broad acre landscape. And we now have animals on pasture, causing a lot of compaction of soil in some cases. We also view water as a commodity, unfortunately. And because it's a commodity, we think of it as something to be bought and sold. And we also have introduced this concept of efficiency with water. And a lot of people who work in the field of planning for water, a lot of our decision makers think about water as something to create an efficiency with. And what that means is we don't want to use water for something that's not important. And usually that means human purposes. And if it's not a human purpose, it's not an efficient use of water. And so we steal water from the landscape and from the ecosystem because we don't consider some of the broad landscapes to be productive. And we put the water in pipes and move it someplace where we can use it as humans. And so we're starving ecosystems of water so that we can use it. And we call that efficiency. And also concepts of storage of water. We have an engineering mindset in this society where if you mention water storage in a water meeting, automatically most decision makers, most engineers, most hydrologists, most water scientists think of dams. You might think of the Hoover Dam. That's a big water storage. As big as that water storage is when you create a dam with a pond, the storage capacity of the body of the earth is much larger, vastly larger. And we've built these concrete jungles covering the land in impervious surfaces and compacting the land. We have water rights here in the West. There are some people around the world that don't understand water rights. How can anyone own the water? Some people have so much water, they don't have to think about water rights, and that must be nice. And then of course, water imports and exports. If you just look one valley over into the Owens Valley, the city of Los Angeles gets 1/3 of their water from the Owens Valley. They've basically drained all of the water from that watershed to import it into LA, starving an entire beautiful ecosystem that includes Yosemite. There's another kind of relationship with water. And I look to Native people for this relationship. And I myself am Native. And I've worked as a water scientist in Native communities for 20 years. And water is, we often hear the term water is life. Water is living. Water isn't just a resource or a commodity. Water has its own spirit, and water has its own will, and water has its own desire. One of the first things I learned in permaculture was to ask what water wants. And so that's what I try to do in permaculture. I'm trying to relearn how to be in relationship with water. Since I'm 70% or so water, I want to be able to hear what water wants and honor that in my designs that I do for permaculture. So what can we do? How can we change our relationship individually? What can we do with our own two hands here in Las Vegas, maybe, to change our relationship with water? This image comes from Brock Dolman. Brock Dolman is my first water permaculture teacher. I met him 11 years ago at a permaculture design course, and he changed my life completely. And this image comes from his book, Basins of Relations, and you can find that on his website from the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. But right now we have a problem with water. And we think about all of the paving and the pipes and the pollution. And the solution is to slow it, spread it, sink it. And it's very simple. In permaculture, the problem is the solution. So if the problem we're having in the desert is we either have no water for most of the year, and then for 4 or 5 days out of the year, we have way too much water, and that causes flooding and pollution and all sorts of problems. Well, if the problem is too much water at certain times of the year, that's also the solution. It's just a matter of what are we going to do with it. So water is moving too fast right now. When we pave, when we create channelized waterways or put water in pipes, water moves at a very fast rate of speed. Is that the right way to say it? Water likes to meander. If you look at water naturally on the landscape, rivers like to go back and forth. The problem with that is we like to build things, and we really, as humans, like to build things in floodplains. I don't know why, but we do. And when we build in floodplains, we limit the river's capacity to meander. And when we do that, water moves faster and faster and faster. Meanders help water slow down. When water moves faster and faster and faster, it becomes an erosive force. It starts eating away at the riverbanks on the side. And as it eats away at the riverbanks on the side, all of that sediment goes into the water. So the water gets muddy and polluted. And so we're really like replicating this design everywhere in almost everything we do as humans right now. This is the design we're replicating. Now, on the other hand, if water moves slowly across the landscape, it has the chance to meander, which is naturally what water will do. If you have a patch of dirt outside and a water hose, nice patch of dirt, not too clayey, and you could just put the water at a slow rate of speed and let it drip onto the dirt. After some time, it'll create a path and it'll create its own meanders. Water wants to move slow, and it'll create its own structure to be able to do that by meandering. When water moves slow, it moves into the landscape slowly, it soaks in, it doesn't cause incision into riverbeds, it doesn't create sedimentation in the water. It actually does the reverse. When it soaks into the groundwater, it cleans the water. So the body of the earth, or the groundwater, we call it, becomes a filter for the water. And so the water gets cleaner. So all of the things I'm going to show you are ways that we can help water slow down. And this is through rainwater harvesting. So of course, Mother Nature has been catching, storing, and distributing rainwater just fine on her own for a very long time, until we came along and started mucking around and making some changes and pouring concrete all over the place. But these rainwater harvesting techniques we're talking about are ways that we can start creating a repair, ways that we can start slowing water down and helping it to soak into the landscape. One of my water teachers, Sepp Holzer, says if we design correctly for water, 70% of our work is done. And that goes for if you want to plant a garden, or if you want to develop a property, or pretty much anything you want to do. If you design correctly for the water, 70% of your work is done. So this is from Brad Lancaster, and he came out not too long ago and did a presentation here in Las Vegas. He's from Tucson, and he has a website, harvestingrainwater.com. And so right now we're in the drain age. Drainage is how we deal with water. We move it away. It falls on the roof, we shed it away into the street. It runs down the street, it goes into some grate, and then who knows where it goes? It goes away. I don't know where it goes. It drains. The goal is to move into the retain age. So instead of shedding water, we want to catch it. And we want to catch it as close as we can to where that raindrop fell on the ground. If we can do that, then the water will be as clean as possible, and we'll be able to cycle it into more systems. So at home, we could do this by reducing paved areas. We could build rain gardens or French drains or swales. We're going to talk about some of the details about what we can do. And today we're going to be talking about both plot scale, which is pretty much your home scale, your yard, and we're going to talk about the bigger landscape as well. But we don't get rain. This is I hear this every single day, but we don't get a lot of rain. You're right. We get about 4.19 inches per year, and that's not a lot of rain. And it's hot here. So the climate contributes to how much rain evaporates. And if the rain is falling on hot, dry ground, you know when you have like a sack of flour and you pour a drop of water into the sack of flour and the water just sits right on top of the flour and it doesn't mix in, it just sits there. That's what the rain does when it falls on the ground here in Las Vegas. The water, the ground is so dry and so parched, it's hydrophobic, which means it's afraid of water. Hydrophobic is the scientific word for it's afraid of water. The water isn't able to penetrate the ground. And because it's so hot, it just evaporates. And so we lose a lot of our rainfall to evaporation. Okay, but we don't get any rain. We do, actually. We get a little bit of rain. We get 4.19 inches per year. So this, I'm so sorry to drop math on you on a Saturday. At least it's not Saturday morning, it's Saturday afternoon, but I know it's the weekend. But you don't have to get your calculators out. Just know that if you ever do want to calculate how much rain you get on your own property, there's tools to do that on Brad Lancaster's website, harvestingrainwater.com. So this is the calculation. And so we're going to calculate for half an acre, kind of a generous size property. Half an acre is a lot of square feet, this big number, but we need this number in square feet. And then our 4.19 inches per year. In feet, that's 0.349 feet. You get a third of a foot of water per year, not a lot of water. So how much water is falling on a half an acre per year here in Las Vegas? 56,857 gallons per year. So for getting no water, 56,000 gallons that's kind of a lot of water. If you have a half an acre, if you have a quarter of an acre, it's half of this, 23,000 gallons. Definitely a volume of water that I think is worth caring about, even as an individual in the middle of the desert with no rain. If we can figure out what to do with 23,000 gallons of the cleanest water available, its pH is perfect for growing plants, and it's free. We don't have to pay the utility for it. Then I think that's a useful thing. So I love this quote. Irrigation of the land with seawater, desalinated by fusion power, is ancient. It's called rain. In a lot of places, people are talking about desalination as a way to deal with shortages of water. Desalination is an incredibly expensive process, and the sun does it for free. So I think we should take advantage of that. So let's dive into techniques. And again, this is a really high level overview of techniques. And of course, we're talking about this from the permaculture perspective. So these are some permaculture principles for us to keep in mind as we're designing for getting water into the ground. We want to catch and store energy. In this case, the energy we're talking about is the energy falling out of the sky as rain. Observe and interact. It's important to take time to watch how the rain falls on your land. How much falls at one time? How often does the rain fall? Understanding that's really important to understanding what kind of tools we're going to implement. Obtain a yield is always a goal, and in this case, our yield is water and plants and possibly fruit and vegetables and trees and microbes, microbiology, healthy soil, beauty. That's an important one. Okay, I can't emphasize this one enough, and I probably should have put this one at the top. Small and slow solutions. I am not one that likes to move slowly. Once I learn something, I want to go out and do it. It's really important to take your time to learn, to play. I would definitely recommend playing with water and dirt a lot, so you could figure out what works and what works for your soil. Use and value renewable resources. In this case, water can be a renewable resource when we cycle it as often as possible in our system. And creativity is really important. No matter what perfect design you see on paper, it's going to be different once you apply it to your own house. So it's going to take some creativity. And sometimes that means using more than one technique or altering a technique, or you might build a water feature that just didn't work for some reason. And so that learning process is going to have to inspire some creativity. And inspired from the last presentation we did for Las Vegas Permaculture, designing from patterns to details. And I'll definitely be giving that presentation again for anyone who wasn't able to attend, hopefully in person someday. So this is just a short video. I'm hoping that you'll be able to hear it. So can you please let me know in the chat if you aren't able to hear it? If you aren't able to hear it, I'll share the link of the video with you, and then you can watch it on your own after the presentation or on another day. But please let me know if you can hear this okay.
Than pavement. Okay, so let's look at a little house here. This is a 1,000 square foot house, and I want you to see what happens when we rain on it. So here comes the rain, and what happens? The water is out of here. Stops raining, and where's the water? It's gone. Okay, so we have this free, high quality water falling from the sky, the highest quality water we have, and we just got rid of it, creating the need to import water at great cost from elsewhere and thus destroying ecosystems elsewhere. But we could instead enhance our ecosystem as we enhance ecosystems elsewhere by using our local on-site resources rather than depleting them and creating this perceived need to import water from elsewhere. So maybe someone gets the idea that that is possible when they see that water flow off and they think, I want to harvest rainwater. Oftentimes people think tanks. So here are some substantial tanks. This is a 1,700 gallon tank, another 1,700 gallon tank. This is all to scale in relationship to the house. And now it rains on this, and what happens? Woo! Tanks are full! Oh, but there's still water leaving the site. Okay? Oh, all right. So it stopped raining. And what happens? Well, we've got 1,700 gallons of water here, and we've got another 1,700 gallons here for 3,400 gallons. So that's water that we otherwise would have lost. But I don't know if you noticed, the cool thing here is compared to the previous scenario, we lost a lot of water, but not as quickly. It took a little bit longer for that water to run off site because we caught that 3,400 gallons in the tanks that otherwise would have been lost. That's awesome. But we still lost a substantial amount of water after those tanks filled. So we forgot the largest and least expensive storage, our soil. What we need is the sponge. So let's get a couple sponges, okay? Now, in your landscape, these sponges could be sunken, mulched, vegetated rain gardens, water harvesting earthworks, bioswales, porous pavement, and so on. So with that in place, with these strategies that absorb the rain rather than running it off, let's see what happens when it rains. Tanks are full. Okay. We got a huge biblical rain. Okay. And woohoo! Okay. All right. Now, I don't know if you guys saw the difference here, but compared to the previous scenario, we still lost water. Okay, we're always going to lose water because there's going to be rain events that exceed the capacity of our system. And of course, we had rain hitting the unsponged side, so that was lost. But what hit the sponge was largely absorbed. So let's see how much water we caught. I'm going to remove the house, put in this little measuring cup, and let's see what we got. So, 1,700 gallon capacity from this tank. Nice! Another 1,700 gallon capacity from this tank. Sweet! We got 3,400 gallons of water that otherwise we would have lost. High quality local water. You like local food? Well, try local water. Okay, you can see where my pinky is. That's how much water we got from the tanks. But now let's look at the sponge, okay? The earthen catchments. So I take this sponge. Oh, yeah. Nice! Look at all that water. And that's only one sponge. What about the other half? Sweet! Oh my God! It's abundance, baby! Shake those buns! So look at how much water we got there. Before it was down here where my pinky is. Now it's way up here. So we got over 10 times as much water caught in the sponge than we did in the tanks. So what's the take-home message? Tanks are a fantastic strategy to have water readily at hand for whatever you want. But don't overlook the soil. The soil is our largest and least expensive tank. We just need to set up the surface to allow that water in, so concave, not convex, and then the sponge and mulch and vegetation. And then once it's in the soil, how do we get it back out? Well, we can plant pumps. So that vegetation draws the water up from its roots and into the canopy so we can enjoy the water in the form of shade, food, wildlife habitat, erosion control, and so on. And, of course, these same earthworks will also feed our creeks, our rivers, our springs, and our wells. This is the way we can put more water into the watershed than we extract, thereby enhancing the ecosystem over time.
Yeah, we were lucky to have Brad Lancaster come out and do a presentation. I guess it was probably the year before last year. Last year was almost a total loss, but yeah, he came out and did a great water harvesting presentation here in Vegas. So today we won't be talking about tanks. I'll be talking about the other sponges that we can think about creating on the landscape. Tanks relatively are pretty expensive, a really expensive way to harvest a small amount of water. And so I like to start with the body of the earth as the least expensive, easiest way to harvest water. And then I suppose if I had a lot of money, I would think about tanks. But I would probably myself start with the least expensive option. I'm a little inexpensive person. So the first one I want to talk about is dry wells. And I think this is a really good option for properties here in Vegas. And a dry well is basically a trench that's filled with porous material. And that could be gravel, stone, certain types of mulch, more rough organic matter. So a dry well is basically just this trench that's designed to capture water in between the spaces of the non-porous material, and it allows infiltration to happen more quickly into the landscape. And especially if you want to get infiltration deeper into the groundwater surface layers. So this is just a little image of what it might look like from a side view. You can either do this like inside of a perforated pipe, or it doesn't have to be a perforated pipe. You can just dig a trench and then fill it with gravel. And then from the top, it might look something like just a bit of rock. And you could have, the trench can be just like a hole dug into the ground filled with rock, or you can actually build, like a trench. So it might look like a small rocky riverbed in your yard. Wouldn't look like much of anything at all, but it would be infiltrating water whenever it rained. Couple things you want to keep in mind with dry wells is you don't want a lot of sediment getting into it. So this shows water being collected from the roof and being delivered into the rocky area. The roof wouldn't have a lot of sediment sitting on it. So you don't want the water going over an area with a lot of sediment, because that'll just silt up your dry well and there'll be no space for water collection to happen. It's best for areas that are pretty flat or only have a little bit of slope in the land, and you shouldn't construct it in drainage ways. My favorite for urban areas is rain gardens, and rain gardens are basically a basin. So you just have a depression in the landscape, and the bottom of that basin is level. And it's an infiltration basin, and it's pretty inexpensive to install. There's different types of designs you can do, but some very simple designs would just involve some friends, some shovels, maybe some beer and soda, sandwiches, and plants. Definitely plants are an important part of the rain garden design because it helps the water to soak in and also helps the water to be able to be pumped back out for usage. Rain gardens can be designed in very developed areas. So these are some rain garden designs that Brad had worked on. This is just collecting water from the roofs and the hardscapes in these little spaces that are depressed areas filled with some sort of mulch and vegetation. You can also build rain gardens on the side of the road to capture runoff that's flowing down the road. And these would be built in areas, that little space in between the sidewalk and the road that's typically the responsibility of the city to maintain. So some advocacy work for our decision makers is a good thing. If anyone here has the energy to do that, that's something I'm always working on, is advocacy with decision makers, scientists, engineers, anyone working with water. I love to take time to educate about these things that can be done. So this happened in Tucson. This is a before and after picture. It's all they did is cut a hole in the curb. They did a little curb cut, and the water now flows into these areas, and the plants are definitely a bit happier now. And all they did was create a curb cut and got a few people out there to dig. So the area where the tree was lower than the area where the street was, and then the water flowed into it. Very simple, very inexpensive, but it's a way for us to be able to have a better relationship with water, keep it cleaner, reduce runoff, reduce flooding, improve our vegetation. Again, plants are really important. It helps structure the soil to help improve water infiltration. Again, it's best in areas that are relatively flat or only have a little slope. A little slope is good. Shouldn't be constructed too close to your house. You don't want too much, water around the foundation of your house, and it shouldn't be constructed in drainages. Swales, often the favorite water infiltration technique of permaculture designers is swales, and it's basically a trench or a berm that is constructed on contour, and it's good for areas that have slope. So on contour of the land means that if I had a piece of land, I'll use my back scratcher for this. I had a piece of land that's off contour. That means the water is going to flow when it falls on it. On contour means flat. So flat on the landscape. The bottom of the swale is going to be flat, so the water is going to spread out even across the bottom of the swale. And swales can collect and infiltrate massive amounts of water. So a lot of times these are used more effectively on larger areas of land, but you can have small swales in gardens that are effective. Just keep in mind they do collect a lot of water, so you need to design for that. We don't get a lot of water in general, but when we do get it, we get large amounts of it. So if you have garden swales, you don't want to just flood out all your plants during a rain event. So the planting around a swale is really important. But basically, you'll have a sloped area and you'll dig the trench. So the bottom of the trench is flat and water will collect, and then water will soak into the ground. Sometimes springs will pop up downslope of the swale. Sizing of the swale is very important in the design. If the swale isn't big enough, it could blow out and cause damage below the swale. So creating a spillway, a place for the water to go if you get too much water, is really important. This is a swaled garden. That's what a garden would look like with this swale. This has multiple swales, so the water will move down the slope and get caught in the swales and infiltrate into the ground. In some places, you can have your garden fed entirely by rainwater with this type of garden, but here we would need extra water. We don't get enough rainfall in the right regime to support that. The proper design is really critical, or you could have a failure of the swale and that could cause damage to the landscape and possibly erosion, which is something we really always want to avoid. Erosion causes loss of topsoil, and in the desert, when Mother Nature is left to her own devices, it could take 1,000 years to create an inch of topsoil. It can take a really long time. So the loss of the topsoil filled with microbiology is something we really want to avoid. And it's also important to remember in our climate, not in all climates, but in our desert, brittle climate, when you build a swale, you might be stealing water from downslope. So sizing the swale is really important for the purpose and the goal that you're trying to achieve. And in the desert, if we're looking at the full ecosystem, it might not be a good idea to steal water from an ecosystem downslope for our human consumption higher up. So that's just one thing I like to remind people with soils. And then keyline design. So now we're moving a little more to broader landscape ideas. So keyline design is an idea that comes from Australia, from a man named Yeomans. And it's either a trench or a berm, or it could even be a ripping pattern, just a very tiny, tiny trench dug into a landscape that is slightly off contour. So whereas swale is on contour, this is flat, a keyline is very slightly off contour. It's not like we design our plumbing, which is to flow. It's only slightly off contour, so it's going to flow, but very, very slowly across the landscape. The keyline uses very small channels that are slightly off contour, and it's basically, you can use this for farming, for gravity irrigation of rainwater through a broad landscape. This is what a keyline might look like. It'll follow the contours of the land, but be built slightly off contour. So the water moves very slowly through the landscape and evenly irrigates the entire landscape with the rainwater that falls on it. Keyline design is exciting to me in desert landscapes, especially when we're talking about the ripping pattern of keyline. If we rip grooves in the keyline pattern onto the landscape, say in rangelands, and either seed it with perennial grasses, or the seeds are already there. Honestly, you don't necessarily have to seed it. Seeding it might help it along, but the seeds are there, the perennial grass seeds. It's a way to help quickly restore soil, topsoil. You know, when we lose topsoil, we basically lose our ability to live as humans. And so restoring topsoil is, to me, one of the most powerful things we could do if we're thinking about reversing desertification and correcting for climate change. Soil is carbon sequestration, and building soil everywhere can help us reduce and mitigate the effects of climate change. And you know, we're meat eaters in this society. We eat and consume a lot of meat. It would be really nice to think about not doing that, but you know, we live in a machine, and the machine is going. And so when I think about what can we do within the confines of the structure of our society, keyline design really excites me. If we could promote soil, some places are able, I have heard, to build an inch a year of soil with the use of keyline design and holistic management, different types of holistic grazing. It's not easy to manage, however. It's very human intensive, requires very good design and a lot of babysitting, but it can be done. And so I could go on and on for hours about keyline. I just think it's so exciting. This would be a keyline silvopasture. This would be trees, perhaps an orchard. It requires adequate slope on the landscape to be effective, so not really good for flat areas. And it can be applied in different ways. So we can either talk about it in terms of water harvesting, it can be trenches or berms, or it could be keyline ripping to support perennial agriculture. Ian has a comment. Ian, do you want to turn on your microphone?
Sure. Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Hey.
The words are too little for me to read, so just
Oh
say
no,
them.
yeah. I was just looking at the key lining, and I'm like eyeballs deep in paper on agave cultivation methods, and it was so like all I could see are these agave terraces from like Mexico and southern Arizona, and that picture from Australia looks like a green version of like Serowana, Kenya, and which is like 3,000 I think years or so ago, and a lot of like and also at Tumamoc Hill in outside of Tucson that had a lot of terracing there as well. And there's a trincheras culture that builds these things, and they look exactly like that. It's just this like
So a lot of indigenous cultures did build terraces on keyline.
Word.
Some of them were Permies will call them wiggle waterways.
Wiggle
But
waterways.
it'll wiggle waterways, and it's waterways that'll like wiggle its way down a slope in a terrace. Good observation.
That's awesome. I love the wiggle waterways. I'm definitely going to use that.
Yeah, the thing I love about keyline is you can combine it with many other concepts in different ways. It's just a way to help water move slowly. And of course, all of these things, all of these ideas did not come from permaculture designers. Permaculture designers just decided to put them in one book. All of these ideas came from indigenous people. The swales we talked about, the Paiute people in the Owens Valley built them. Ancient swales, and that's where they had their traditional gardens.
They're still there.
They're still there. They're still collecting water. Still. So yeah, when the first I don't know what they are called, explorers, or they were like from the army or something, went into the Owens Valley. Owens Valley is totally dry now, totally drained out. Yes, Bishop Paiute, that's where the swales are. They're in Bishop. And Big Pine too. They came out, and in these log books that these army people had, they said that if you walked from one side of the valley to the other, you would be like waist deep in water the whole time. And that was from swales, because swales capture massive amounts of water. And this is a rant, and this is a sidetrack. It is no mistake that the LA Department of Water and Power purchased every single key point in the valley, except for the ones that are currently owned by the tribes, because that is where you start designing water catchment. So I can say more about that on another day. Terraces. So the potential for very quickly rehabilitating watersheds, entire watersheds with terraces is amazing. And I'm thinking green jobs. I'm thinking we need to figure out how we're gonna reverse desertification, fix climate change, feed people, restore watersheds, have healthy green jobs. I think building terraces would be a great way to do that. They did a project in Los Plateau in China. The Los Plateau runoff goes into the Yangtze River, the Yellow River, the River of Sorrows, they call it. And they call it that because sometimes the river is so full of sediment that you can walk on it. On terraces, it's really designed for steeper slopes, larger landscapes. You can also build a terrace on a very small landscape. If you have a lot of slope, it can help provide access to the land. If you have a really slopey hill with no access and you can't do anything with it. If it's a really slopey hill, you might require retaining walls, but terrace gardens are great, even small ones. And it requires the appropriate geology of the soil. So you really got to know your design if you're going to start building terraces. I wanted to show you a video from the Los Plateau. I'll link it in the Permaculture Las Vegas group and page, so you can watch it at another time. We're just coming up on 2 o'clock, and I don't want to keep everyone inside all day on a nice day. So lastly, ponds and lakes. Ponds and lakes, it is not a trench or berm that collects water on a slope. I don't know why. That's a cut and paste mistake. You know what a pond and lake is. We don't have to define it. It can be designed to be fed entirely by rainwater, even in a desert landscape. Remember that calculation we did earlier. We can get a lot of water. It depends on your catchment area. So your catchment area is basically your mini watershed. What areas drain into a lower area, and how big is that? And when you do your calculation, you would do your calculation for that catchment area to determine the number of gallons of water that would be going into a lake or pond. Ponds and lakes design, I learned from Sepp Holzer, and he is either Sepp or Zach Weiss. Zach Weiss is a protege of Sepp and one of my friends. I would definitely recommend going to either of them directly if you ever wanted to build a lake or pond. Zach Weiss does do consulting for lake and pond design, and lakes and ponds are designed with shallow and deeper zones to take advantage of thermal mixing to keep the water moving and healthy. And this is a before and after picture of a lake that was designed by Sepp Holzer in Tamera, Portugal. They're rather dry, don't get a ton of rain. They certainly get more than we do. The less rain, the smaller, lake you would get. This lake was designed with terraced banks, so the lake level will naturally rise and fall with the seasons. And as it does, it'll inundate the terraces to feed them, and they have food planted along all of the terraces. It can be built either on flat areas or on areas with slope. An earthen dam is built at the narrowest point of the valley, and it helps balance out the water supply through all of the seasons. This is the Kramerhof in Austria. It is Sepp Holzer's, I believe it's his first property that he designed. You can have lakes and ponds designed on very steep slopes. The banks are designed to follow the contours of the land. So it's not just a circle pond or something like some standard shape on the land. It follows the contours of the land. And again, the banks can be designed as terraces. So it feeds whatever you want to grow as the water level in the lake or pond naturally rises and falls. Certainly they can be the most complex features to design. You want to design them right. If they're not designed right, a dam failure is not a good thing. It's important to understand the geology and the soils very well when building a dam. I use dam and lakes and ponds interchangeably. Like they're the same thing in my head. And it can be expensive. There's a cost of equipment, whether you have to buy it or rent it, and a knowledgeable operator. Not everyone knows how to build a dam. But the payoff is amazing. So this is just a little video on update from the Tamera property in Portugal. And I just love it. It gives me so much hope to watch it. Let me know if you can hear it.
Hello everybody, once again here from Tamera in the south of Portugal. And because we had a lot more rain even in the last couple of days, I decided to make one more video about the water. And it's quite beautiful because the lakes are getting fuller and fuller. The big lake is already full. And I wanted to show you now how the water comes down the hill here on the campus. It's a different area than in the last video. And here behind me, we see already a kind of slope in the land. So I remember quite well when I was here for the first time 2 years ago, there was no earthwork done here yet. And it was just a clean slope without any structures in it, and the water just poured down the hill when it was raining. But now we have 3 swales in this land, and we can see quite well. The swale means basically, if I go over here, so we have a ditch here where the water can land and go down into, and then on the other side we have a little hill structure, so the water can sink into the earth, flow down the hill, going with the gravity. And on this little bump we see all these plants. I'm not sure actually what it is, but no, so on these 3 swales that were built here, we see the plants, that's where they are, and they are at the moment full of water. And what's interesting then, now we are kind of on the top of this land here. So the way this water retention landscape here was designed was that all the water that overflows from here goes into this lake. And since this lake is full also now already, the overflow from this lake goes down into the big lake. Here we are at the overflow, so it's maybe we can see it from here. Down there is where the water goes down into the next lake. And let's go check out what's going on, because there was so much rain that the next lake is full already. So let's go take a look over there. Okay, now we are down in the valley behind me. We see Lake 1, the big water retention space. The first one that was built here 2007. Probably the people who watch some of my videos have seen it a few times, because it's really just this prime example of what a transformation like this can look like. I mean, it kind of, people might say, yeah, you build a dam and you store the water. But that's not all this is. This is a new ecosystem that was developed and home for so many animals and plants, and not just a dam that's keeping water. It was designed in a way with certain depths in some spaces and shallow areas where different kinds of animals like to live, and so on and so on. But what I want to show you now is the overflow, because after this strong rain in the last days, this lake actually got full. I mean, I arrived in this project 3 weeks ago now, or something like this. And when I came, it was probably 2 meters less of water in here. And people were already thinking, wow, how will we survive this summer? Because maybe it was the last rain for 6 months or something. But then this rain came, what a blessing. Now the lake is full and overflowing. Maybe you hear it already. And now let's take a look on this side, because what we see here, this stream coming down the hill, that's actually the overflow of this lake. So it was designed in this way that the water, when the lake gets full, finds a good way to escape from the lake back into the natural water stream from Tamera all the way back into the ocean. The same path that we actually walked last year. I mean, I walked only one day, but the Tamarians, 40, 50 of them, walked all the way from Tamera back to Lisbon, near Lisbon, where this water will end up in the ocean through the River Sado, that's what it's called. And yeah, what a blessing this rain was. What an amazing example of how to transform a landscape. And again, I maybe put some pictures here of what the area here in the Alentejo looks like, and what can be done if you understand natural cycles and cooperate with the nature to create living space for us humans and for the wildlife that enjoys this so well as well. Thank you for watching once again the water topic. I really like it, so that's why I decided to make one more video. That's it for today. Ciao! Hello everybody, once again here from Tamera in the south of
Yeah, it really amazes me that that is a project that Sepp Holzer designed, and I feel incredibly lucky that I had the chance to do some learning with Sepp, and then also some hands-on installation of some projects with him. And hopefully I'll have the chance to do that again in the future. I think we have a lot of work to do. I'm interested in any way that we can infiltrate water, whether it's on 1/8 of an acre or on 10,000 acres or 1,000,000 acres. It is my goal um, to help let people know what's possible and how to do it. So we really talked today about what's possible, what can be done on different size landscapes. I'm hoping that we'll be able to delve deeper into it, especially after we're able to meet in person again and do some hands-on learning here in Las Vegas. I'd love to actually build some water retention landscapes with the folks here. So here's just some recommended learning pathways. If anything I've said is of interest to you, a permaculture design certification is a great way to go. I'm really impressed with Ecoversity online right now. My first permaculture teacher, Penny Livingston Stark, is teaching with Ecoversity. Really in-depth PDC. The Earth Activist training by Starhawk is fantastic, especially if you have any activism veins in your body. It's a really great PDC. Quail Springs is located in Santa Barbara County, California, not too far away. They also have a desert brittle landscape, and there's some really good water work going there in Quail Springs. Definitely recommend that you pick up these books by Brad Lancaster, Rainwater Harvesting. Of course, I have them both. I use them all of the time. Really great, really great photos, great diagrams, wonderful in-depth help with getting started with design. Also, Sepp Holzer's books, particularly Desert or Paradise, I recommend, but I also like Sepp Holzer's Permaculture if you're more interested in general permaculture. This is a great book. And Elemental Ecosystems. If you get a chance to look up Elemental Ecosystems or Zach Weiss from Elemental Ecosystems, I know he recently did a TED Talk and he talks about water retention landscapes, and he's doing some great work here in the United States. And of course, Las Vegas Permaculture. I set up the Las Vegas Permaculture page and group to help bring together like minds here in Las Vegas. My goal is to help foster an environment of learning and a place where we can help each other, learn from each other. And hopefully in the future, I'd love to organize a mix of classes and work bees. So we could do learning during one week and another week actually build the thing we were learning about. Hopefully a lot of water features